Good afternoon, Bulldogs, or good morning. Um, Welcome. I'm going to talk a little bit here about the Fugitive Slave Act, which was part of the Compromise of 1850. So, what was it? Why was it part of the compromise? Well, this is what the Southern slave owners wanted in exchange for them banning the slave trade in Washington, D.C., and California coming in as a free state. So, this was there was already a fugitive slave law on the books from 1793, but the complaint in the 1840s was that it wasn't enforced enough. So here in 1850, they're going to create this.
The original Fugitive Slave Law was in 1793, and it recognized that there were certain parts of the country where slavery at least was theoretically illegal, and that slaves might run off from places where slavery was legal. And the idea was that people who lived in areas where slavery was illegal were obliged to return slaves to their owners. The laws of one state would be respected in another state. Southerners felt that this law was not being adequately enforced, and so as a result of the Compromise of 1850, one of the provisions was that a new fugitive slave law would be enforced, which would bring the federal government much more directly involved, which would provide financial incentives for judges to rule in favor of slaveholders, and which would deny slaves any prospect of a jury trial to determine whether they were in fact fugitives or not. And this was seen as an important concession to the southern states and to southern slaveholders. And from their point of view, they felt that if their property wasn't secure in the Union, they didn't want to stay in the Union. And this, of course, created an enormous backlash in some quarters. Although, by and large, the Fugitive Slave Law was enforced. And by and large, the circumstances for fugitive slaves were not improved in any particular way, even though some anti-slavery types in the North were outraged by what the government did. The government clearly aligned itself with the slaveholders in this regard, and it demonstrated that slavery was centrally part of American society and politics. It's not just a sectional institution. It has a very national basis.
Okay, so the question from there, and he had a couple of things in there. One was, as he said, it was enforced, so there was backlash in the North for it. But the other thing you got to think of is what they did there was they made slavery a Northern issue as well, because it was no longer just in the South, because they could come up to the North and the Northern governments would support them in bringing slaves back down to the South. So, how did the North react to the Fugitive Slave Law? There's a couple of different ways you can answer that. Just make sure you have a reason for whatever you answer. Okay. Now, this one is a Newsella article, which you'll read. And if I click on the link, it'll take me to. I usually will put this in a PDF file too, because see, it's going to make you probably sign in. So what I do oftentimes is put it in to a. I mean, I can sign in, but I don't know if you'll be able to get in. So we may have to. The link might not work for you, and you'll just have to use the. I'll figure it out, but you'll have access to it. And then, so basically, right here, what you've got is an article and kind of go through fugitive slave law, fear of going back to there's this original one, two, three, four, five paragraphs. Okay. And then you'll go through that and read that. And then you've got, what did the fugitive slave law allow slave owners to do? What happened to Solomon Northup? How does this story expose the dangers of the new law to Northern African Americans? And then we've got part two, we've got 3 and 4. I try to go basically down the paragraphs in order. The only one that's not in order is this one, and I explained it in the first paragraph. What did Frederick Douglass do to oppose the fugitive slave law? And then finally, in the first paragraph, the author compares the actions of African Americans after the fugitive slave law to sanctuary cities. How are they similar? And that's right at the front. And then finally, I've got this graphic here, this poster, says, "Fugitive slaves, attention. The slave hunter is among us. Be on your guard. An arrest is planned for tonight. Be ready to receive them whenever they come." Do you think this advertisement was created by abolitionists or pro-slavery advocates? Why? So you're going to pick one or the other, either abolitionist or pro-slavery, and then you're going to take something from here and explain why. And that's pretty much all you have. This was, again, part of the Compromise of 1850. It was the Southern concession that the Southerners wanted.